Well, hello there. How are you today? Recently at my blog called Free Market Follies, which I hadn't written anything for in about 2 years, I decided to publish something called The Interplay Between Mind and Reality in a Globalized World. And I started that out with the following words: the global economy thrives on the complex movement of raw materials and manufactured goods across borders, powered by an intricate network of roadways, container trains, and ocean cargo ships. These supply chains ensure that foodstuffs and other products are available around the clock, meeting the demands of consumers wherever they live and work. Yet, amidst the hustle of global trade and the relentless pace of modern life, a deeper question emerges. Are we truly living in reality, or are we confined to the constructs of our minds? The philosophical inquiry, this philosophical inquiry taps into age old debates about the nature of consciousness, perception, and existence. As we interact with the world, our experience of reality is inevitably mediated by our minds. So I could go on to read more of that, but that's sort of the theme of this episode anyway. It's taking a reality check, looking at perception, memory, and the mind. Because if you're thinking about your thinking, it's a little bit harder to have your thoughts go astray. Welcome to today's episode of Critical Weight Theory, where we're deep diving into the concept of reality. It's a pretty lofty premise, isn't it? So, how much of what we perceive as real is actually grounded in truth? How much of it is a product of our own minds? Setting the stage, I'm going to introduce the idea that our understanding of reality isn't just a simple reflection of the world around us, but a complex interaction between conscious awareness and unconscious thought processes. So I'm not really a scientist. I'm not like a professional philosopher or anything like that. Even though I play music, I'm not even a professional musician. I'm really not that much of a professional anything. I'm still going to address the issue of what is reality, though. When you hear somebody say he refuses to face reality, it's a common phrase, but what does it really mean? Does it, you know, uh, take into account how the mind affects everyday experience? Or is it just a simplified way of looking at somebody we don't understand or we disagree with? And then there's the big question: are we really living in reality? Sorry, that's a bit of a tongue twister, and I'm being distracted by a cat right now. But anyway, so it's a matter of philosophical inquiry, and I know philosophical things are really bogged down by overthinking and all that kind of stuff, but I guess I'm guilty of that sometimes. So I'm going to take listeners from philosophy and to psychology, exploring the concepts of reality and perception. At least that's hopefully what I'll do. I'm going to discuss the idea that our reality is constantly reevaluated and reexamined, influenced by our beliefs, experiences, and biases. There's something called confirmation bias. Sometimes it's called the "I knew it all along" phenomenon. And confirmation bias shapes our reality. There's a lot of context and depth that we have based on wanting our pre-existing ideas confirmed, and that's part of the role of the mind in shaping reality. You know, Mind and experience go hand in hand. I'm going to delve into how our mind plays a crucial role in shaping our everyday experiences. I'll discuss theories that suggest we might not be living in reality as we think we are. Could there be a bigger theory at play? That's another thing. Like, is there a theory that really hasn't been truly successfully elaborated on that could better explain and unify our conception of reality. So, I could get into more cultural and literary insights here, but, I would just suggest that you try to think of things on your own before you go off on some adventure reading a ton of different authors. Think about, what you want to explore and think critically about your own existing notions and sort of map out what you want to do in terms of studying thought before you go ahead and just dive right on into it. That way, you're already approaching it from your own sort of philosophical place. And I do encourage you to be sort of open minded, but not too ridiculously open minded, as they say. It's possible to have your mind so open that your brain falls out. I think there's a Tim Minchin song like that. So, yeah, if you're going to look at literature and look for clues about reality that way, that's obviously a good thing you can do. But it's not always going to help us think more deeply and differently about reality if we're just borrowing ideas from people who came before we arrived on this planet. I know that it might be a sort of a controversial point to raise, but sometimes you can get a little too bogged down by saying, "Oh, this is part of this philosophy and that's part of that philosophy." Not to say I'm not going to do that at all in this podcast episode, because I am, but at the same time, you can get too distracted by talking about a philosopher or a certain thing like that rather than the issue at hand. So, yes, you can look at essays by leading philosophers and psychologists. You can do all that kind of stuff, but tackling contemporary issues like identity, well being, and the future of mental health care could get a little bit bogged down if you're like reading some author from like the 1800s or something. So, what can be said about reality, memory, and perception? Well, for one thing, I think there can be false memories. Well, that's a proven phenomenon. And the phenomenon of false memories can be vivid, detailed, and convincingly real. And, there are all kinds of people who are generally unaware that their memories aren't real. And, that can be a freaky thing as well. So, there's another question of memory and self-perception. You might want to think about why one's sense of self depends on social acceptance and how memory plays a role in shaping our identity. If your identity is largely based on the ideas of others, is that necessarily a good thing? Can culture kind of be a trap sometimes? And are you being a little bit held back by the popular notions in the society surrounding you? Are you really free if you're sort of chaining yourself to all of these standard approaches to life? That's one of the things we might want to ask. So, false memories can make individuals feel detached or uncertain about their reality, which is another thing. And frankly, like some of the false memories we have are probably instilled in us by the surrounding culture that we are near. And of course, there are a romanticized notion of what happened in the past, and maybe sometimes we imagine things were scarier than they actually were. Like there's there's the idea of a therapist or a head shrinker who's sort of implanting memories of abuse into a person. And I've actually heard that that's a real phenomenon, that it can happen because these people who go to see these therapists are really in a vulnerable state, and that's sort of the nature of the job. You're putting yourself out there and talking about some of your most intimate secrets, and so of course there is a danger that in some ways you are being led down a darkened path in that process. And that's not to say it's always even intentionally done. It could just be through the interplay of the person talking to their therapist. Maybe it's actually an unhappy coincidence, but I do think that sometimes when people sort of reminisce about the past, they might misrepresent what actually had happened. So here's a question I'm going to pose to the listeners out there. Why do some memories feel fake even though we know they're real? Have you ever had that happen? So that's another interesting topic. And go ahead and, if you want to make this an interactive episode, you can sort of comment on it if this is on YouTube or wherever. If you're a weirdo, you might want to stalk me on social media and tell me a story about a memory that felt fake even though you know it's real. Or maybe if you know somebody who's had a false memory and they thought something was absolutely true that wasn't true. If you've got a story like that, feel free to share that as well. So this is like the fourth segment of the episode here. It's briefly, I want to talk about technology, AI, and the future of understanding reality. So there have been some advances in brain imaging and AI, as I'm sure some of you might imagine, as the technology expands. So you might want to look into future technologies and the question of whether they could lead to better mental health care, and if they could give us new insights into consciousness. And there's also the possibility of AI affecting our understanding of what it means to be conscious and aware. That's another freaky concept. I know a lot of people are very critical of AI, but I do think that there is potential for this technology to answer interesting questions. And as far as AI in the mind goes, there's an article from Frontiers in Psychology discussing whether an appropriately programmed computer could be said to have a mind and what this means for our understanding of reality. Being unprofessional, I don't actually have that article on me right now, but you might want to consider that question too, just generally. Like, what would it take for us to say that a computer does have a mind? And does it have an understanding? Or is it all just simulated? And then you might want to ask, well, is our understanding really any different from that of a machine? So as far as final thoughts, I think the main points I discussed here are sort of highlighting the fluidity of reality and the powerful role of the mind in shaping our perceptions. You definitely want to try to think about all these different ways that you're thinking, and if they're really lining up with reality as it actually is. I think a lot of the time, we're only partially grounded in reality. And of course, some people have practically, they practically live in Mars, or on Mars, I should say, to be grammatically correct. But anyway, here's the call for action, or the call to action part of the episode. So I encourage you as a listener to reflect on your own experiences and perceptions, you know, questioning what you believe to be real and how your mind might be shaping the reality that you live under. And in closing, I'll thank you for joining me on this puny little journey through the mind and reality. And stay tuned for future episodes. I actually recorded 2 of them today. And, I'll probably at some point continue to explore fascinating intersection of psychology, philosophy, and everyday life. And, in addition to that, I still sometimes will do movie and TV show reviews, and I'll talk about politics. Well, I suppose there's a little bit of politics in everything. Even this episode probably could be considered a political one in some respects. But anyway, I'll wrap it up here. This episode has ended up being a little bit longer than I thought, which is fine. But have a good day.